Welcome to this lecture that extends the ideas that we covered in the previous two lectures on human perception. In today's lecture, we will discuss presence, immersion and embodiment. I will start with this question: why do virtual experiences feel real? Imagine you are standing at the edge of a cliff, which is virtual and not real. So, you are at the edge of a virtual cliff in the VR world, and you are looking down from the top of a skyscraper, or you are talking to a virtual patient inside a virtual patient's app. Even when users know that the experience is simulated, you may still experience fear when you are looking down from the top of the virtual cliff or the top of a skyscraper, or you may feel empathy with the patient which you are meeting in the virtual world. Why is it so? How does it seem that this experience is so real? This lecture explores why. At the end of today's lecture, you will be able to distinguish between three concepts, which are presence, immersion and embodiment, which are fundamental to immersive experiences. You will be able to explain major theories of presence. You will be able to identify technological and psychological factors that influence immersion. You will be able to analyze how XR systems create convincing experiences such as the ones I just told you about, and you will be able to evaluate immersive applications using presence and immersion frameworks. In the first part of this lecture, we will talk briefly about the three concepts of presence, immersion and embodiment, and then we will start focusing more on the concept of presence. We will take up the remaining two concepts in detail in the subsequent lectures. So, what is presence? Well, presence is the psychological sense of being there. So, as the English word present implies that you are present in the class, which means you are physically there in the class. But in the sense of extended reality, it is not just being physically there, but also being mentally there. So, the psychological presence of being there refers to the meaning of the word presence. However, presence is not the same as immersion. Immersion is a term that is more system driven. It is related to how much you are into the system that has been created specifically for you. Presence depends on your own perception, and so links in very well to our previous two lectures, and how the user interprets. So, based on your own perception and interpretation, you will sense being there or not being there, and indeed it is quite central to the effectiveness of AR/VR experiences. There are various dimensions of presence. You might have spatial presence, which is the feeling of being located in the virtual space. You might have social presence, which is the feeling that others are real and responsive, that there are people in the virtual world which are also real, and they correspond to real people or real animals or real objects, and they are responding to what you are doing. Then there is the concept of self presence, which is that you feel represented inside the environment. Feeling represented inside the environment gives you the feeling of self presence. Then there is narrative or task presence, which refers to the engagement that you have with the activity. So, indeed there are four types of presence. We should not try to limit our thinking of presence to being physically there or one of these four concepts. Any one of them can define presence. There are various factors that influence presence. If you have low latency, which means your actions are immediately replicated in the virtual environment and your tracking is stable, that will give you a good sense of presence. So, we need natural interactions within the system, and we need interactions which are responsive, that is what you do should result in some output inside of that virtual world. You need to get consistent sensory feedback. So, if you are taking some actions in the virtual world, then you should get feedback within that world, and equally that feedback should be consistent. So, if I clap my hands once and the app responds by clapping back, when I clap again after 10 minutes, it should again respond similarly by clapping back. So, the sensory feedback should be consistent, and there should be alignment between user expectations and experience. So, if there are some expectations that you are carrying into the virtual world, that is what you should experience. That will ensure that you have a good sense of presence in the world. Now, how do we measure presence? There are various methods that are used to measure presence. These are classified into subjective methods, behavioral cues, physiological signals. Subjective methods include questionnaires and self reports. So, you may give a user a questionnaire at the end of them experiencing a VR app, and based on their responses you may be able to tell how present they were inside that world. So, these reports which come from the users themselves in the form of responses to questionnaires or any report they may give or any short interview they may give, which discusses how they felt inside of the virtual world, will give you some idea about their presence inside of that virtual world. Then there are behavioral cues that you can use. Are the users avoiding using that particular virtual app? Are they hesitating? How about their body movement? What clues can you get from how they feel when they are using that app? If they are completely present in the world, you will sense that there is a positive expression on their faces, there is a positive vibe that you get from them. They will not be avoiding the app, they will be interested in using it, and maybe even for long periods of time. So, these sorts of behavioral cues will give you some idea about their presence. Thirdly, you can use physiological signals. You can actually measure their heart rate and skin conductance as they use that virtual world. So, if they are enjoying the particular world, then their heart rate might be excited, or they might feel a sense of enjoyment as they are using the app, and that will reflect in their heart rate. Whereas, if they are not present and they are thinking about something else, or they are not really into the particular virtual app, then their heart rate may stay flat. So, by measuring these sorts of physiological signals, you will be able to tell whether the users are present or not in the virtual world. However, there is no single perfect measure of presence. So, various researchers have come up with different measures, and typically they can be classified into these three types. Again, presence in augmented reality is different from presence in virtual reality. VR replaces the real world entirely, whereas AR overlays the virtual content onto the physical world. So, as a result, the presence differs. The presence in the AR world is dependent on whether this overlaid content is actually aligning well with the real environment or not. So, this kind of mixed reality really increases the complexity of perceptual consistency that you may experience. So, it is a different ball game understanding presence in AR as opposed to VR, where you are completely surrounded by the virtual world. Next, let us talk about the second concept, which is that of embodiment. Embodiment is nothing but the feeling that a virtual body is your own. For instance, there might be an avatar that has been created as a digital mock-up of you using a 3D software, and that virtual body, if you feel that virtual body is actually representative of you inside of that virtual world, then we can say that that avatar is embodying you. So, it involves body ownership, agency and self location, three concepts. Do you feel that that avatar is actually replicating your body in the virtual world? Do you feel that that avatar has the means to make changes in the virtual world, or has agency in that virtual world, just like you would have? and whether you are able to locate yourself with that avatar when that avatar is actually amongst many other individuals or other avatars. Are you able to self locate yourself? If you are, then you have truly embodied that particular avatar. So, embodiment also strongly influences the engagement that users have and the behavior that they show in the virtual world. It is critical in training, therapy and social VR. So, these three applications where you are using virtual reality for purposes of training people, or you are using them to treat some diseases in forms of therapy, and in social VR where various people come around to interact. So, embodiment is crucial for these three applications. So, for instance, if you are represented within a virtual patients app as a doctor, do you actually feel that you are the doctor that is talking to a patient and actually interacting with the patient? Equally, if there is a social VR app, do you feel that that avatar is different from the others and that that avatar represents you? If so, then indeed it has embodied you. So, all of this is built upon a lot of psychological and perceptual science research. We looked at the rubber hand illusion in the previous lectures. It showed that ownership can be manipulated. So, as one hand of the user was withdrawn and a rubber hand was placed in place of it, as the rubber hand was stroked, slowly you start feeling that you are being stroked. And then when a hammer came down on the rubber hand, you saw that users were yelling and shrieking, which meant that they felt that their own hand was being hit with the hammer. So, indeed that ownership of the rubber hand had been transferred to the user. Likewise, entire avatars may be able to represent your entire full body. So, full body illusions extend this idea to the entire avatars. What is crucial is that there is synchrony of visual and motor feedback. The visual feedback which you are getting and the motor feedback that you are experiencing, there should be synchronized. If that happens, then indeed your body ownership has been taken over by the avatar. So, XR enables this kind of controlled body ownership experiments as well. So, there have been a number of studies in the area of body ownership, where people have even tried interchanging genders. So, these sorts of illusions are crucial to experiments that we can perform using extended reality. So, when we come to the idea of avatar representation, it is not so important to have as much of a visual realism to your real physical body than movement realism. So, if the avatar is able to mimic the movements that you are making, then you may find that that avatar is indeed kind of embodying you, even though the visual representation of that avatar may be way different than how you look like in the real world. If we create avatars that are first person avatars rather than third person in the apps, that usually also strengthens your embodiment. Whereas, if you have third person views, then that can usually support awareness and learning. So, you can have two types of avatars. The first type is the first person avatar, that is usually good for embodiment, whereas third person views are usually good for being aware and learning in the virtual environment. If the avatar behavior is poor, that usually reduces the trust that you have and the presence that you sense in the virtual world. So, it is crucial that we have good avatar behavior, which means the avatar is able to replicate you well. Again, this is closely linked to presence as well. So, if the embodying by the avatar is not good, then your presence will also be reduced. Another key concept that we have briefly talked about and is linked to embodiment is that of proprioception and agency. We discussed that proprioception gives us a sense of our body position and movement, and that agency arises when the actions which you have carried out have some predictable outcomes. If there is a latency or delay or there is a mismatch, this will reduce your sense of control in the virtual app. So, what is crucial is accurate motion mapping. If we are able to map the motions well, then it will result in good embodiment. So, in augmented reality, embodiment is slightly different compared to virtual reality. Often the embodiment in augmented reality is partial. Your hands may be embodied, or maybe your head, or the tools that you are using may be embodied and shown within the AR app. Whereas, in VR apps, very often your full body will be embodied. Now, embodiment in AR requires alignment of virtual coordinates and physical coordinates, which is really crucial to how AR apps work. So, digital coordinates must match well with the physical coordinates. If there are objects that are impeding your view, that creates occlusion, and occlusion errors usually disrupt the illusions you have about ownership of the body that is being shown. What is also crucial in augmented reality is scale and perspective. If these are not consistent and the scale is much different than what you would experience in the real world. So, hammer that should be this big, if it appears to be this big, then that will create an inconsistent feeling of embodiment. So, embodiment in augmented reality is very much dependent on scale as well as perspective projections. Now, let us talk about psychological effects of embodiment. Embodiment indeed can alter people's attitudes and empathy as well. So, if you feel that an avatar is embodying you in the virtual world, that can actually change your attitude, and it can also help you have empathy with people in the virtual world. So, users may often behave differently in virtual bodies as opposed to how they behave in real world. Now, that has applications in various fields such as education, bias reduction and therapy. So, by embodying yourself in a virtual world, it may be possible to reduce the cognitive bias you may be carrying with you in the real world. So, if there is a feeling that you may appear biased in the real world, if a virtual world is instead presented to you, maybe you are less biased because of the fact that you are embodying an avatar. That avatar could be looking very different from you. So, maybe it has a different color of skin or different eye tone or different hair color, and that may actually help in bias reduction, because you suddenly are able to embody avatars with different physical characteristics to you. So, as a result, you suddenly start feeling that you are owning different bodies than you have yourself, and that can help in reducing that the bias you have towards people of different types. So, it sometimes also raises ethical questions, whether your thinking and how you would perform in the real world is actually getting manipulated. So, there are a lot of questions to be addressed, and indeed these are also research questions that need to be studied in detail in the coming years. Okay, so, now we will move into the phase where we will talk more and more in detail about one concept, which is presence, and leave behind these three fundamental concepts which we have been talking about. One was immersion, which is all about what the system provides. Immersion is related to what the system is able to provide for you. Presence is what you as a user are experiencing, and embodiment is about how the user experiences themselves. So, we will leave behind these three, but it is important for you to understand the differences. Immersion is what the system is providing to you, presence is what you are experiencing, whether you are there, not there, and so on and so forth, and embodiment is how you as a user are experiencing yourself in the virtual world through avatars and other representations. Now, presence is critical in VR because it influences engagement, learning outcomes, task performance, your emotional responses and behavioral realism. So, presence has a significant influence on all of these aspects, such as how engaged you are, whether you are learning what you are supposed to from the app if it is a training app, whether you are able to carry out your tasks properly or not, whether you are showing empathy and other emotional responses that are congruent with what the app is desiring from you, and whether the behaviors that you are showing are realistic or not compared to the real world. So, the phenomenon of presence has a number of applications. It has been used in medical simulation, it has been used in education, military training, in therapy and industrial training. We talked about some of these aspects in the previous slides, but we will also show some other case studies as we move on. So, we can say that presence is a subjective feeling of being located in an environment. The feeling of being there can be said to be being located in an environment. This environment could be physical, it could be virtual, or it could be a mixture of physical, virtual or mixed reality. It is indeed a psychological phenomenon. So, it is about how you are acting in the virtual world psychologically and being there. Presence research has developed over the years with early roots that can be seen in teleoperation and flight simulation. Number of people have contributed significantly to presence research. These include Thomas Sheridan, Mel Slater and Matthew Lombard, and we will see some aspects of Mel Slater's contributions in terms of questionnaire. Researchers sought to explain why users respond realistically to these sorts of simulated environments in extended reality. So, these researchers have looked very closely at how users respond realistically just like they would in the real world to simulated environments. So, indeed presence is not an illusion of graphics. Some people assume that if the graphics is better, then you will be more present in the virtual world, but research has shown otherwise. Presence depends on various factors including sensorimotor consistency, which we will see next. It depends on interactivity, how interactive you feel in the virtual world, whether you find it to be believable and whether it is responsive. So, if these four things are met, then there is a greater likelihood that you will be sensing presence in the virtual world. A simple environment can produce strong presence if the interactions are convincing. So, the environment may be simple, not very complex, but still you might feel strong presence in it if the interactions that you find within the virtual world are convincing enough. Now, as opposed to that, immersion refers to the objective capability of a system to deliver a surrounding, inclusive, extensive and vivid illusion of reality. So, if a virtual world is able to provide a surrounding, inclusive, extensive and vivid illusion of reality, that is termed as immersion, or you feel immersed in that world. Now, that is a property of technology. So, if the system is able to deliver on this, a good surrounding, being inclusive, extensive and a vivid illusion of what reality is, then you might feel that you are immersed in that. So, it is dependent on the technology that we are using and not that of the user. So, it is significantly different from the concept of presence, where it is related to being whether the user is there or not there. The various components of immersion. Immersion depends on visual fidelity, auditory fidelity, haptic fidelity, interaction fidelity and environment fidelity. So, immersion is dependent on 5 factors. First is whether there is visual fidelity between what you are seeing and what you are thinking there should be. Then if there is spatial audio which gives you auditory fidelity, that will also help you be immersed in the environment. If you get touch and force feedback, that will even increase the immersion that you feel in that environment, because that will bring you closer to what you would experience in the real world. In addition, if you can interact just like you would interact naturally in the real world, the natural interaction techniques, your immersion will increase, and on top of that, if there is realistic behavior of the objects that are there in the virtual world, then you will feel that you are immersed in the virtual world. So, if you are trying to create an immersive world, you would need to think about these 5 aspects of how closely you are able to mimic visual, auditory, haptic, interaction and environmental aspects of the real world into the virtual world. Various levels of immersion, people may experience low immersion or moderate immersion or high immersion or very high immersion. For instance, when you are visualizing something on your desktop PC, we can say that the level of immersion is quite low. When we move on to mobile augmented reality, immersion increases to a moderate level, and when we go on to room scale virtual reality, we start sensing a higher level of immersion. And finally, when we move to multi-sensory simulation environments where multiple sensors are being simulated, then you may experience very high immersion. So, immersion is multidimensional. A system may have high visual immersion, but low interaction immersion. So, on the visual front the immersion may be high, on the interaction front the immersion may be low. So, for instance, if you are watching a 360-degree video, you will not be able to interact much with it, but you will have a high level of visual immersion because it is in all 360 degrees. So, you can move your head and experience it from all angles, but it is a video, which means it is a capture of some real or synthetic world in all 360 degrees, which you are able to experience visually by rotating your body or moving your body. But in such a video, the interaction will be very limited, because you cannot really change anything in that video. It is just a video which is being shown in 3D. Now, there is a relationship between immersion and presence. Immersion increases your probability of presence. So, if immersion is higher, then there is a good chance that your presence is also higher. However, you cannot guarantee presence. Even if a world is quite immersive, you may still not feel present in it. So, different users may experience different levels of presence in the same system. So, while immersion is a property of the system, it is a technological thing, okay, it is a result of technology. Presence depends on the user. So, different users may experience different levels of presence in the same system. So, one of the factors contributing to presence is that of sensorimotor contingencies. It is a fundamental concept that was proposed by Mel Slater. Sensorimotor contingencies or SMCs are the lawful relationships between actions or motor commands and the changes that they produce in sensory input. So, they are the relationships between the actions and the changes they produced in your sensory input. For instance, if there is a cup with print on it that is on your desk, and you are seeing only one view of it at the time, but since you have a sensorimotor contingency with it, or you are able to realize that it is a 3D object, you realize that when you rotate it, something else will come into view. So, your action will have a sensory consequence. So, for instance, if you turn your head, you will see something else. So, that is known as the sensorimotor contingency. The sensorimotor approach argues that your perception is not just passive reception of stimuli from the environment. Instead, perception depends on an individual's mastery of the regularities governing how sensory information changes when they act. For instance, when I move the cup, I will have something else that comes into view. So, two different concepts of illusion are crucial when it comes to presence. One is that of place illusion, which is the sensation of physically being somewhere or feeling located inside some place. For instance, you may feel located inside a virtual operating room in a virtual patient's app. So, that means you have a place illusion, that is, you have been transported from where you are currently to another location. The second type of illusion that is crucial to understand when it comes to presence is plausibility illusion. It is a feeling that events occurring in the environment are actually happening, that they are plausible or they are actually happening in reality. So, for instance, a virtual patient may suddenly collapse in a virtual patient's app, and users may react emotionally despite knowing that it is a simulated environment. So, that means the users are feeling that this could have really happened, and they feel a connection to it, and they find that plausible that some action has resulted in the user falling down. So, to have high presence, what we need is that you want the user to be there and also believe that events matter. That is, you must have a place illusion and you must have a plausibility illusion. If both illusions are present, then you can say that the user has high presence. So, indeed both place illusion and plausibility illusion contribute to realistic behavior. Next, we come to the concept of social presence. Social presence refers to the feeling of being together with another person or another group of people. So, we have talked about this briefly. So, there are a number of social presence apps where people can get together, for instance, and conduct meetings, or they can get together for high tea and so on and so forth, or to watch some movie. So, this has applications in the fields of virtual meetings. It also has applications in the field of telemedicine, where doctors remotely consult patients. It also has applications in the field of collaborative learning, where you may be sat at your home, but you feel that you are learning together with your classmates. So, for instance, Open University, which is running a course where there are individuals that are coming in to attend a tutorial, they may feel co-located with other students who have come to attend the tutorial if they are put on a virtual reality app on a headset, and they are seeing themselves surrounded by other students. That leads to what is known as collaborative learning that mimics a classroom scenario. So, you need social presence to be able to effect that kind of learning. You may also have co-presence, which is a special form of social presence, where two users feel that they occupy the same virtual space. That is, we are both inhabiting the same virtual space. That is crucial for collaborative XR. For instance, if you are designing a car and you have engineers who are located in various remote locations, and they all come together and occupy a room where a digital model of the car is present by putting on a head mounted display, then they can work collaboratively on the design of the car, and that kind of presence is known as co-presence, where you feel that you occupy that same virtual space where that car is present. There have been various methods used for measuring presence. Researchers may use subjective measures, behavioral measures, or physiological measures. Examples of subjective measures are questionnaires. Examples of behavioral measures are observing the actions, and physiological measures are the heart rate, skin conductance, and maybe tracking of your eye. So, we can measure presence by giving users questionnaires which they can fill up, or by observing the actions, or measuring their physiological signals such as their heart rate or their skin conductance, or where their gaze is when they are using the virtual reality app. So, a number of questionnaires have been developed. So, we now look into each one of these. So, we will talk about 4 different types of presence questionnaires. One is known as the PQ. It was developed by Bob G. Whitmer and Michael Singer. So, this presence questionnaire measures a user's sense of presence in a virtual environment by assessing their involvement, sensory fidelity, adaptation or immersion, and interface quality. So, these are the aspects that the questionnaire measures. It assesses how involved the users were in using the virtual world, whether the sensors were communicating sending out signals which had high fidelity, whether there was enough immersion, and how good the interface quality was. Then there is the ITC SOPI or ITC Sense of Presence Inventory questionnaire that was developed by Independent Television Commission. So, this ITC SOPI questionnaire evaluates presence across different media by measuring spatial presence, engagement, naturalness or ecological validity, and negative effects. So, by seeing how present you were spatially, how engaged you were in using that environment, whether there was naturalness in your interaction, and whether there were negative effects while using that virtual world. So, there are 2 other types of questionnaires. These are the IPQ and SUS. IPQ stands for Eye Group Presence Questionnaire and SUS stands for the Slater-Uso Street Questionnaire. IPQ questionnaire was developed by the Eye Group. This assesses presence through 3 dimensions, namely spatial presence, involvement and experienced realism, along with the general sense of being there. The SUS questionnaire was developed by Mel Slater, Martin Uso and Anthony Street. It is a concise questionnaire, so a short questionnaire that measures the subjective feeling of being in the virtual environment rather than the physical one. There are also behavioral indicators of presence. So, we talked about the questionnaires as one way of measuring presence. The next method is that of the behavioral indicators. So, for instance, if we find that users are avoiding virtual obstacles or they are ducking under virtual objects or they are maintaining social distance from avatars, then we may think that these behaviors are indicating their presence in the virtual world. The physiological indicators, for instance, your heart rate increases or your increased sweating or your pupils are dilated or your stress response varies, that again tells you that you are actually involved or being present in that virtual world. These are useful because users may not accurately report presence. So, making such measurements also gives you clues about how present they were in the virtual world. Presence has been used in healthcare sector quite a lot. So, presence is used for virtual patients, clinical avatars and smart robo patients, and a strong presence in these sorts of applications in the healthcare sector improves the communication training that is imparted to trainee doctors and nurses, their decision making abilities and their development of empathy. So, we can use their presence in healthcare XR apps through virtual patients, clinical avatars and smart robo patients to improve their communication, decision making and empathy. So, development. First, let us talk about virtual patients. Virtual patients are nothing but computer generated patients that simulate realistic symptoms, behaviors, emotions and clinical histories. Examples of virtual patients are those used in medical interview training, mental health assessment or breaking bad news to the relatives of a patient or in emergency triage practice. So, these patients can be used, these computer generated patients that simulate the real symptoms, behaviors, emotions and clinical histories can be used for training doctors and nurses, assessing the mental health of trainee doctors or breaking bad news to the members of a family or in emergency triage. Presence is a key role here because learners will feel if they are present that they are interacting with the real patient than with the computer simulation. If the simulation is not realistic, then the presence will be low. If the simulation is realistic, then the presence will be high. So, it encourages natural communication and clinical reasoning. So, by using such apps which have high levels of presence, we can encourage natural communication in trainee learners. We can also improve transfer of skills to real clinical settings. So, we can train them in various scenarios which would be very difficult to train in the real world, because you would need actors who come in and represent patients, and that will then transfer that skill they develop in the virtual world into the real clinical setting, where they have to interact with real patients. Then there are clinical avatars, which are virtual representations of patients or clinicians or anatomical models, which are used for diagnosis, treatment planning, education and collaborative care. So, these are typically used for instance, virtual anatomy exploration, rehearsing surgeries before doing them in the real world, rehabilitation training and telemedicine consultations. By using avatars, what we can do is we can explore the anatomy of a patient. We can also rehearse how to carry out the surgery, the steps of carrying out a surgery in the virtual world before we actually operate in the real world, or we can use it also to rehabilitate patients or provide consultations remotely to patients. Here presence is important because it enhances your spatial understanding of anatomy. It also supports embodied interaction with the clinical data. and it improves your engagement and procedural confidence. So, if a doctor is given the opportunity to act on the virtual representation of a patient where a tumor is present and he has to operate on the tumor, if he actually does a virtual rehearsal of the surgery, it will sort of give him a mental imagery of how you must do it in the on the real tumor. And he can also make mistakes in that virtual world, which can then eliminate the possibilities or reduce the possibilities of making mistakes when he is carrying out the operation on the real patient. Presence is also used in the context of smart robo patients. These are physical robotic patient simulators or mannequins, which are integrated with AI, with sensors and physiological models. So, examples of such smart robo patients are high fidelity mannequins in simulation centers or robotic trauma patients or AI enabled nursing training systems. Again, here with such patients, presence is important because they provide realistic physiological responses which increase their authenticity, and that enables practice of complex clinical procedures. So, if you have a dummy or a mannequin that is in front of you, which is a physical representation of a patient, and on that physical representation you can then carry out the surgical procedures and train yourself. These sorts of robo patients will often also be AI enabled, which means they will adapt to the actions that you are making on them using artificial intelligence. So, that will enable practice of complex clinical procedures in advance, again helping doctors to plan surgeries, to learn about how to treat patients. So, these sort of smart robo patients create pressure and decision making conditions which are similar to real emergencies. Presence is also increasingly used in education, where being present in a virtual classroom with other fellow classmates enhances your engagement in the teaching, enhances your knowledge retention and your motivation to study as well, as opposed to learning in setting where you are learning from a 2D screen where you can't interact. If you are in a virtual classroom where you can interact with other classmates and with the teacher, then that increases your engagement with the content, your knowledge retention and the motivation you have to learn the course. So, XR indeed transforms these sorts of passive learners into active participants by creating an environment where you sense that you are present and you are actually present as if you would be attending a class in the real world. Now, as a designer, how do you design so that you can create enhanced presence in your virtual worlds? You need to take care of mainly 5 things. You want to be minimizing the latency that is there in the virtual app. You want to be maintaining sensory consistency. You want to support natural interactions just like people would have in the real world. You want to create environments that people can believe and trust and find them similar to the real world, and create meaningful responses. So, if there are some responses that the app is giving, then they should be meaningful based on what actions you have taken. And if you find that the app is giving you responses that would not be seen in the real world, then you would suddenly find yourself losing the presence in that app and finding it to have a disconnect with what you would experience in the real world. So, indeed as a designer you should think about these 5 factors: minimize the latency, maintain sensory consistency, support natural interactions, create believable environments and ensure meaningful responses. So, a number of factors that break presence that you as a designer of immersive environments should think about. You should be aware of tracking failures or creating unrealistic interactions or creating some mismatch between the audio and the visual outputs, or have a lot of system lag or poor avatar behavior. So, if you can avoid this, then you can ensure presence. So, there are 5 factors that break presence. One is that of tracking failures, second is that of unrealistic interactions, the third is that of a mismatch between the audio and visual inputs, the fourth is that of the system lag, and the fifth is that of poor avatar behavior. Let us look at a specific case study of the fear of heights in the virtual worlds. So, if we ask the question, why do users fear virtual heights? It is usually because the virtual system signals danger, and your cognitive knowledge cannot completely override the perception that you are actually in the physical world, but experiencing a virtual world. So, that demonstrates that you have a strong presence when you are in that app, where you are at height, but in the virtual world. So, indeed presence is not reality, presence is actually a psychological response, it is not an objective measure of realism. Sometimes stylized environments produce stronger presence than photorealistic one. So, it is not essential that the environment that you create is very much similar to what you see in the real world. It may be a stylized artificial environment that has been created, but it may give you stronger presence, and that is because it is the response that you are feeling psychologically, and it is not about how realistic that environment is. To summarize, we talked about presence, immersion and embodiment. We learned that immersion is a system capability, presence is actually an user experience, and your presence essentially emerges from sensorimotor consistency, plausibility and meaningful interaction with the system. And in the next lecture, we will transition from here, where we discussed being in a virtual world, to being someone inside that world. So, we will go more into concepts of embodiment and immersion. I thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.